Hi guys, can everyone hear me pretty well? So my name's Chris. I work for USC Radio, and if you guys have ever turned on your car radio and heard classical music, it's actually KUSC, and essentially my team represents the interactive version of KUSC, but we're also known as USC Radio. And it started about 3 years ago, and we are kind of missioned with creating new types of platforms, new types of stories, and new types of experiences that promote music discovery. And with that said, we're a nonprofit, so we get to do some really neat things sometimes. And Geotunes, I think, is a great example of a project that some really dedicated music lovers kind of built just through the power of location and music. So just a quick question. Has anyone tried either Geotunes or a Spotify app? Can I just get a raise of hands? OK. Cool. So Geotunes, to kind of explain what it is a music discovery app. But what the twist is that we're actually using location as our sort of focus point. And so what we've done is we just sort of thought out loud, you know what would the world be like if we could discover music by browsing a map? The aspiration was, in fact, a writer of mine and us sitting around going, dude, let's go on a road trip where we start in LA, head east to New York, and while we're going through each city and state, we could actually ping and find out a song from that place or a song about that place. And so that was kind of the beginning point for us. And as you guys can see, it started off with this idea of a road trip, so we have a little van. But over time, it just became this ambitious goal to kind of cover the whole world. When we were thinking about how to actually structure this project, we thought, let's come up with some users and let's come up with an idea of how people could enjoy it. So we definitely thought road trip travelers would like this app. Backpackers we thought would probably dig it, and then finally people who are really proud of their hometown and who usually like to kind of share what's really valuable in their backyard. For example, it was only until this app that I realized that one of the members of Metallica went to the same high school that I went to, and it was like, wow, this is amazing, And then of course we also thought that there's always that one guy who wants to show off his knowledge. And we definitely wanted to give him a chance to kind of boast. And so we figured this could be a good tool for that opportunity. And so if you ever meet cocktail guy number 5, hopefully you'll know where he got his sources from. So the challenge about music, and specifically digital music right now, has a lot to do with licensing. But as you guys start keeping up to date with the trends and kind of what you see with iTunes Radio and everything else, you'll kind of see that this whole landscape is changing very quickly. Our idea, though, probably started about 3 years ago. And at that time, these were kind of the things that we were thinking about in terms of what did we need to overcome. So of course, to build a music map, we didn't really have any background in cartography. We also had no background in sort of geospatial data, and even at that time, geospatial data and architecture really wasn't all that important, wasn't really of mode or flavor at the time. We didn't really have music rights, we didn't really have any connections with record labels, and we had no connections with artists, and there was really not even an ecosystem for apps. So in other words, like any project manager probably today would say, you should not build this app because there's probably no way you're ever gonna get this off the ground. One of the bigger changes that happened, though, was Spotify came into the game very quickly, very aggressively, and they decided that they, too, wanted to create an ecosystem because the way Spotify kind of works today, there's tons of songs. In fact, there's so much music on Spotify, you will never hear it in your lifetime. And Spotify is very much aware of that. So they thought, let's sort of create a way for you to search it and curate it. And so they created this ecosystem precisely for that reason, so that new interesting ideas on how to curate music could evolve. And with this sort of opened up, we just decided, let's try to build a Spotify app. So once we had a place to start, we then decided, well, how are we going to actually do this entire idea of music and location? And so the person whom I work with, her name is Carly. She's actually from a journalism background. And we kind of sat around and we thought that investigative reporting is a really good tool to actually start unearthing hidden stories. And so after a lot of sort of research and a lot of playing around, we decided that we were going to focus on one perspective, which was we are going to build an app that helps you tell where a story is about. Not where the artist is from, not where the song was written, but just where is it about. And that can range from either in the title of the song, or maybe within the lyrics there's an actual reference to a cross-section, or maybe there's a landmark that was referenced. So we started looking at it from that perspective of can we actually find musicologists and investigative reporters to start unearthing where are the references and lyrics. Little by little, we started realizing that we needed to kind of essentially broaden ourselves, because when you go that deep and that narrow, it can kind of leave you with just maybe a couple of thousands of songs. So from that point, we just thought we need to start doing this in a more broader point of view. And so what that did is lead us to actually finding some data scrapers and algorithm dudes to basically create some data scraping tools. And that really helped us kind of complete a larger database. And so we have this balance of just algorithms, and a lot of it's data scraping. At the same time, we have some investigative reporting. And as we began to launch the app, the third missing piece was actually crowdsourcing. And that was where just people, again, going back to this hometown mentality, just wanted to share what was in their hometown that we had no idea. And so that kind of became the sort of blend of where we got our content. At that point, once we had tens of thousands of songs, we then sort of thought, well, how are we going to present this problem? And so D3.js had just come around at that time. And so we thought this is a really good tool because, in fact, they have a map of the United States. And then at the same time, because it's a Spotify app, we were really kind of basically commit to JavaScript. And so we chose jQuery, of course, Backbone to kind of do some of the structuring and architecture. At the same time, we did some PHP, of course, to store a lot of this data and sort of make a RESTful API. And then right around that time as well, MongoDB had become a major player when it came to essentially storing latitude and longitude. And of course, AWS was free, and so we said, yeah, let's just do that. So this was kind of the inspiration. I'm sure that when we were little kids, hopefully when you were a kid, you got to play with these cool little maps where you just put these little blocks together. And so that was essentially what we wanted to do, and we felt that with D3, we could totally do something like this. So we had the idea, we had the content, and we finally had the tools. So the next step was for us to actually find a designer who would be daring enough to try to actually tweak D3 in a way that could actually sort of blend what we wanted to do plus with what the tool already offered. And so this was Geotunes 1.0. And it pretty much was just the map of the United States. We at that, this launched mid-January of 2012, so about a year ago, year and a half. And it was interesting because the minute we launched this, we got a lot of response, a lot of positive response, but we also got some interesting ones. The main ones were, where is the rest of the world? And of course, there's more than just the USA. So we got a lot of that from just people all over the world because we forgot about, not that we forgot, but we just weren't ready to launch the whole world at the time. So when we finally started getting a couple hundreds of emails, and I was personally writing saying, don't worry, I know where the Netherlands are. Don't worry, I understand that Spain is a really important country. After sort of writing all those emails, I finally, again, went back to the team and said, guys, we need to come up with a strategy. We need to figure out how we can multiply this times 220 or 219 other countries. So the strategy that we came up with was a little bit of what we kind of took a play from Napoleon, actually, where we were really sitting down thinking about how could you conquer the world. And in our case, it was about conquering the world through data. We just thought, how could we do it? And of course, the obvious answer was by city, by major city, then by country. And so we started with the US, and we had that complete. But then we just said, let's focus on Europe. Let's get the top 10 cities in Europe. Let's complete some of that. And we found that Germany became a hub after doing some data. And then we just started spreading all throughout Western Europe. Then we went into Eastern. Then we went to Russia, China, Africa. We intentionally left behind as the last piece because it is the most complicated. But then just went all the way east. South America, Mexico, and then finally Africa is still something that we're working on pretty aggressively. So by version 2.0, we now finally had a map. And this was probably launched maybe 7 months ago. All of the white spots basically meant that we don't have data yet. But if it were darker, then it meant we had some data. And of course, the US was going to look the best still. But we launched this, and people were happier. They appreciated the fact that we as a team understood the world and that we kind of understood that there were other countries outside of the US. But they still wanted more. And interestingly enough, though, they were actually now willing to contribute. And that was really the coolest part. So what we did was, in the app itself, we created just a really simple form using Wufoo. And we basically said, did we miss something? And people just would start contributing their songs. We've been kind of going through that for a couple of months now. And one of the challenges that we have, and again, we did this by design, was we needed to vet and make sure that these songs are accurate. And that became just an entirely different project on itself. But what we have now is a system where we've created ambassadors. And these ambassadors are people who were so consistent at giving us song recommendations, plus we could verify that they were accurate enough, that we just said, hey, listen, do you want to help out and become an ambassador? And so they said, sure. What does that mean? And we basically said, well, if you know of a song in your native tongue that references a place, then can you just hand it over? Spanish is a great language because it kind of pretty much occupies 1/3 of the world. French, of course, has a lot of play as a language itself. And so that's kind of how we've been thinking about strategizing again, because we would love to have the world's largest index of songs about places. So that's kind of where we are today. And I kind of wanted just to go over the Spotify submission process, because if you guys have never thought about creating a Spotify app, I think if you're a developer and you love music, it's a really cool option. And I think that it is easy enough to build one, but there will be a submission process that you've never seen before. And the main idea behind Spotify, from what I've gathered, is that while they're still a new ecosystem, they're really trying to do what Apple once did, which was, let's let the first 100 apps be the best. And let's try to really push the limits on what HTML can do. And let's just make sure that there's not a bunch of iFarts and whatnot. Because of that, they're being really strict about the submission process. And this is kind of what they have developed over time. The first one is you need to kind of pitch your idea and actually just say, I want to do this, and kind of explain how you will go about doing it. From there, you can get into wireframing and mockups, and they will walk you through that process where you deliver your idea and they say, we're not sure about this, or we're not sure about this or that. They are pretty strict about rules on how do you present information to users in a clear, concise way. And what's neat about them is that they're also thinking this is for a global audience, not for people in just the United States. Then they have quality assurance, which for devs basically means, is your code horrible? And even if it's okay, is it inefficient? Could you actually make your code better? So if you actually build something with 20 JS files and it's just sloppy, they will actually have you clean it up. Development, they just, again, want to make sure that your app can be released in an agile way. So in their sort of contract and in their expectation, your app should be up and running 99.1, I think it's like 99.9 or 99.1% of the time. So you always need to sort of have this app working everywhere. And then security has to do with, essentially, if you're going to collect data, are you doing it in a way that they think is appropriate for the user? So, I mean, this is an area where it was really hard for us because we were probably denied 8 or 9 times throughout the entire process. And it took us, I'd say, about 7 months to actually get this going. Mind you, though, we were one of the first ones, so we didn't really know what we were doing, and they probably did, but they weren't going to exactly walk us through it just yet because we were trying to figure it out, and they were probably doing the same. But what I can tell you is that the day they approve it, you'll just jump out of your bed, and it's like a whole new day. So, so that's basically the process right there. And then just here's some of the feedback, which I think was really cool. Once we got the app live, it was incredible. I mean, tens of thousands of users just jumped on within hours. And it was something that we weren't really expecting, but it was great to see, of course. And so this app, which originally started as a sort of road trip app, and we're still kind of working on that concept, and we're continuing developing that, kind of also had some really neat, unexpected uses. One of them, of course, is some of the bands have basically kind of used Geotunes as a tool to kind of say, hey, by the way, we're going to be in this particular city and state. If you want to know more about your city and state, check out Geotunes, which I thought was really cool. One teacher is using it as a way to teach kids about just the world and essentially world history. Another person, which I think I specifically love this tweet because this was a criticism. She just doesn't like the fact that we've used a type of map called the Mercator projector map, and she would rather us represent the world in an entirely different way. And it's an ongoing battle. I think we're kind of like, to her, we're kind of like Oasis, where like she loves to hate us, so she's always kind of just given us some like really interesting response. But we love it because we've actually now started thinking, can we present it in a variety of different flavors? And then just a fluke was one day we were just getting a Google alert, and it was that somebody for Forbes was actually using our app to actually say songs about Pittsburgh and songs about, Baltimore and San Francisco. And we thought that was really cool that we found uses that even we weren't expecting. And so if you guys have any questions, that's pretty much the story of how we threw together an app. But it took a long time, but I think what we're really excited about now is getting more into the processing of all the data that we have now. Questions? Yeah.
During the approval, do you have to submit all of your code to them, or do they just inspect it from external?
No, you actually have to submit them. Oh, sorry. So the question was, during the Spotify approval process or the submission process, do you deliver them the code, or can they just look at your code and do view source or something like that? You actually have to package your entire app and deliver it to them. So the way they've constructed their ecosystem, you're kind of using reverse domain name packaging to describe your app, and you're putting it in a specific folder. You build the app within there. With the developer license, you can test it on your local computer. Once it's working and you think it's ready to show to them, you zip it up and then you just deliver it to them. In the back.
Are you married to Spotify? Are you allowed to expand to other platforms? Like, let's say REO launches an application platform later.
Mm-hmm.
Are you allowed to just build an app for them as well?
Yeah, I mean, Spotify's pretty cool about that. In fact, they're not trying to create a sort of walled garden or a velvet prison or anything like that. So RDO does, I think they either do or they're really getting close to launching like a full ecosystem as well. They have a different philosophy, if I'm not mistaken, which is you can build an actual outside, like a website that lives as a standalone, but then connects into, but then pulls the streaming songs into the app, as where I have to build within the Spotify ecosystem. And I think that's the main difference between the two.
One more question, sorry.
Yeah.
I've never used the Spotify app, like an app within Spotify. Is that available on mobile as well?
No, and that's a good question. The Spotify app ecosystem currently lives on the desktop version. For all of you RDO lovers, you can get the desktop version for free, and you can use the apps for free. So it's not like you need to pay to use the desktop version. As for the mobile stuff, they're kind of transitioning into that. And in fact, if you look at Spotify on mobile today, they do have some Pitchfork content, and Tunigo, I think, is another app. So you can kind of see that they're slowly thinking about that same world. But what you can do, in fact, is you could build just a standalone app that sits on top of Spotify's music engine. And there's a company called Spot On that does that. It's kind of like Pandora for Spotify. Yes?
Is there any profit for this?
No, not the way people understand sort of traditional business models. And what I mean by that is you cannot put any, the question was, can you profit or can you make profit on the app? You cannot put advertising on the app, and you cannot sell people a product or anything on the app itself. But if you did, and in fact, that's kind of common for most music services, because the mentality is the record labels wouldn't appreciate you making money off of their music. But there are a lot of other sort of strategies, if you will, which could be more about business-to-business relationships and stuff like that.
Doesn't Spotify charge?
They charge you a fee. It's a subscription fee, and that really only becomes important if you want to either get rid of ads, their own ads, or if you want to use the mobile version.
So they're making money on it.
The way yeah, I mean they're just like Netflix if you think of it that way. Sure. Yeah.
I think when you were trying to find songs that were specific to what it was, I think you started with seeing within the lyrics, and then you open it up to machine learning or some kind of algorithm that would do that. What kind of, how did you expand? What criteria did you expand to using machine or algorithm?
So the question is, when it came to collecting data, how did we start and how did we expand? So are you more interested in the tech side of it, or the machine side of it, or more of the content strategy side of it?
Just what exactly what criteria are you using to collect? Like, okay, so this is pertinent, this is geo-specific. Like, what criteria are you using to make that assumption?
When it comes to the algorithmic parts of it, a lot of the things we've done already, of course, are basic things like what's your title, what's the title of the album, what's the title of the song. When we can start getting into some of the lyrics, some of the things that we're doing right now are cross streets and references in that way. It's a little bit trickier and it's not as clean because that could take, that'll take us a while. But we've done some of that. We've done some of the landmark stuff, which is kind of easy. In terms of like thinking about how do you match it against something that exists. Like, for example, is there another data set that has interesting locations and landmarks that we can sort of match it to so that it's just easier for us? You'd have to talk to my lead engineer, and he's in Boston right now. So in other words, ninja styles. So yeah.
How granular is the map itself in terms of locating pieces of music?
How about I kind of turn that into a demo? So the question was, how granular are we when it comes to presenting the map in music? I'll give you a bird's eye view first. So this is the map right now, the map of the world. And if you did not know. And essentially what you can do is there are a couple different zooms, but basically you can either zoom right here, which is on the upper right-hand corner, and you can just basically zoom into this guy. Or you can use your mouse, your pad, basically, the actual track. But it's pretty good. Since we're doing everything through vector, you can basically just zoom in pretty quickly. And of course, let's just sort of pick a song placing Nebraska. You can kind of zoom in pretty close. And what's happening is it's just being redrawn. So it's a little bit processor intensive, but at the same time, it's your desktop computer. So we can do that sort of trade-off. The way the app works right now, what you're doing is if you hover over a state or a city, it basically highlights. And if you click on Wyoming, is anybody from Wyoming? OK, maybe how about we pick Nevada? OK, let's just use California then. If you click on the state of California, these are songs about the state of California. If you click on Los Angeles, of course, you can get songs about California. And then if you zoom in even deeper, it should start changing songs about Long Beach. So what's we started having fun with the curation portion, which was kind of cool. But sorry.
So where's the plan?
Oh yeah, songs about Long Beach, but I don't know if they do. So what happens is right now, if you click on, let's say, Los Angeles, which will have the biggest take, on the left-hand corner there's a G. What that means is that we wanted to explain that although the title isn't, Los Angeles isn't in the title or in the album name, if you click on this, you'll get a little window that tells you the story about how the song has a reference to Los Angeles. So this is a Buffalo Springfield. Ah.
There's a man with a gun over there telling me I got to beware.
Yeah, I have a team of researchers and musicologists who are actually they have a pretty cool job. They just listen to music they love and go, that's a kind of a cool reference. They have a pretty big sort of log of just tracks that we know have references, and again, we as part of a sort of radio station, we're about music discovery, but we're also about telling stories and making music really interesting, because at the end of the day, we want to celebrate music. So for us, it was worth it to actually create new content entirely, as opposed to grabbing Wikipedia and shoving it in there. But it takes a little bit longer, yeah. So cool stuff that, I didn't know about, like Jim Morrison has some references to a sort of coffee shop that he used to go to, and he'd get kicked out, and it was about a coffee shop in Venice. So he wrote about the coffee shop. We figured out that the coffee shop was in Venice, so therefore we plotted his song in Venice. And we went even further than that at one point. We just started getting really meta at some point. I don't know if it was just the cold weather or something. We were bored, but we one day realized that you could, in fact, think about an assassination, which, mind you guys, it's a little grim, but we understand that. But we just thought with an assassination, you can actually plot where the person was assassinated, and if somebody wrote a song about that assassination, well, then now we have a reference to that place, in fact. So we even started going a little bit deeper. Let's see if I can show you that. So there you go. So these are basically markers, and when you click on one, it tells you the story of how this song was about this specific assassination. So if you get a chance, I would probably say for sure go to Geotunes and click on this little drop-down menu, and you'll get some really cool stories about things that you just didn't know. Songs about coal mines, songs about hometown, songs about hotels and motels. There's just a lot of really neat things. And as a sweetener, because we're part of, again, a classical radio station, we also have access to a huge library of classical music. So we can even start telling you about Dvorak's, New World Symphonies, and how that was a reference to a place where he was visiting after having left Europe during World War II. Like, where there's even some really deep history like that, which we think is super powerful, and in fact, no one really knows about it. Unless you, of course, are a really big classical music history buff. So, yeah. So anyways, thank you very much, Geotunes.